This morning, we continue our study through the book of Philippians. We're in chapter 2. We left off in verse 17. Before I go there, let me just say, a lot happened while I was gone, to say the least. Roe versus Wade was overturned. I don't know about you, but man, I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. I really didn't. And I tell you, that was an answer to prayer. And we got a lot of work still to do because New Mexico is now the number one abortion destination in the United States. And so, guys, we at least now have the opportunity to change what happens there. And I would say the work has just begun. You know, we got a lot of work to do. We need to be praying. We need to be voting. We need to be putting people in positions that are going to make different choices for our state than have been made in the past. And so I just encourage you guys, man, please continue to pray and understand the fight's not over. Life is precious in the sight of the Lord, and we need to continue to fight for life. And so just encourage you to please keep praying and then get active, man. Let's change the course of our state and see what the Lord will do. And so that's just encourage you guys. Philippians chapter 2. Paul is concluding an exhortation that he had began in chapter 1. It was an exhortation to the church of Philippi to live sacrificially, to live their life with Christian service at the heart of what they were doing. If you remember back with me in chapter 1, verse 27, just to kind of do a synopsis, we've been gone for a couple of weeks from Philippians. I just want to kind of set the table again. Philippians chapter 1, verse 27, notice Paul's exhortation. Only let your conduct be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and I see you or am absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit, with one mind, check this out, striving together for the faith of the gospel. And one of the things that Paul is exhorting them is that they be single-minded, that they be single-hearted, that they're one spirit as they were striving together for one purpose, and that purpose was the faith of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it's amazing because he's wanting them to stand true. He's looking for them to have the mind of Christ. Matter of fact, if you go down to chapter 2, in verse 2, he says, therefore, he says, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, and being of one mind. And let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself, and let each one look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. You see, the whole theme of the book of Philippians is that we would have joy. And the way that you have joy is that you live your life sacrificially. You live your life not just for your own interest, but you live your life for the interest of others. That's where true Christian joy comes from. When you live selfishly, when you live self-centered, your life is never content. It's never fulfilled. You'll never experience the joy of Christ in your life. And so he's encouraging them, hey, guys, be of one mind, be of one heart. Live your life for the faith of the gospel. Live your life with a purpose so you can experience true joy. And in doing so, the world will take notice. In doing so, you'll make a difference in the world that you find yourself in. That's what he declares in chapter 2, verse 14. That's what he says. It says, for it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure. And do all things without complaining and without disputing, check this out, that you may become blameless and harmless children of God, without fault in the midst of a crooked and a perverse generation, here it is, among whom you shine as lights in the world. He says, you're in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, but you're to be the light of that generation. You're to be the light of the world. And the way that you become the light of the world is you begin to live your life sacrificially. You begin to live your life for others rather than for self. And he's hammering that point home over and over again. Matter of fact, in the next passage, what does he say? Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but he made himself of no reputation. He took the form of a bondservant. He came in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. And the very first example that he uses is Jesus. He says, look what Jesus did. He, God himself, became a man. He dwelt here. He took the form of a bondservant, a slave. And then he offered up his life. He was obedient even to the point of the death, not just any death, the death of the cross. And he did it for others. He did it for you. He did it for me. And what Paul is conveying is we have an example that you and I are to follow. That we have Jesus himself, who shows us what it looks like to live your life for others. And then he would go on at that point and he would begin to tell us, look, in my own life. And this is where we pick up in verse 17. He tells us, look, verse 17, yes, I am being poured out as a drink offering on the sacrifice and the service of your faith. And I am glad and I rejoice with you all for the same reason you also be glad and rejoice with me. You see, Paul understood something. That his life was like a drink offering. What they would do in the Old Testament is you would have the main sacrifice, the lamb, the bull, the ram, and they would take that offering and they would fillet it and they would throw it on the altar. And the smoke of that sacrifice would ascend into heaven. And it was a sacrifice to God. It was acknowledging that you know, I have a debt that needs to be paid, and it was offered up. And they would, at that point, take a drink offering and they would pour it on top of the main offering. And it would cause the barbecue to sizzle. And it was just a compliment to the main offering that was taking place. And Paul says, look, you guys have made an offering for me. They had received this incredible offering from the Philippians. And he goes, you guys sacrificed that for me. He goes, may my life just be a drink offering poured on top of the offering that you've offered. And I love the heart of Paul. He's saying, look, I just want to be a compliment to what you guys are doing for the kingdom. That you guys are making sacrifices for the things that are eternal, the things that count. And may my life just in some way accentuate that. May it just be part of what you guys are already doing. He had no ego. It wasn't about him. It was about others. And he said, may my life just add to what you've already done. He says, my life like a drink offering, poured out on your service, on your faith. And he says, and I'm glad, and I rejoice with you all. He was from Texas. With you all. And what he was saying is, look, if I die here in this jail cell, if I'm found guilty before Nero and before the Roman rulers, he says, you know what? May my life just be accentuating what you guys have already sacrificed. It was that would bring him joy. It was that would make him glad. And his part, it was, I want you guys to be glad as well. That's what he says in verse 18. The same reason you also be glad and rejoice with me. In other words, if this is God's design, if this is God's plan for my life, then I don't want you guys bummed out and discouraged. I want you to rejoice with me that God saw it fit that I would be poured out in such a fashion. Because I'm doing it for the kingdom. I'm doing it for the glory of God. And guys, that our lives would reflect that you know what, I'm not here for me. I'm not here for my own agenda. I'm here for God and for his agenda. And that's just not Paul the apostle. That's every one of us as Christians. We've change this gospel to become self-centered when the gospel was never intended to be self-centered. It was to be other-centered. And we have all of our famous authors that talk about my better life and my best day and, how to become rich and how to become healthy and how to become wise. And it all becomes about me. That's not the message of the gospel. The message of the gospel is giving my life for others. It's about sacrifice. And Paul says, my life is being poured out like a drink offering. Because this isn't about me. This is about the Lord. It's about his kingdom. It's about his glory. He would go on, and in verse 19, he's going to talk about one of his mighty soldiers, young Timothy. His protege. Timothy had been with Paul on his missionary journeys, and Timothy had seen all the sacrifices and made the sacrifices himself. And notice what he says in verse 19. He says, I trust in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you shortly, that I also may be encouraged when I know your state. Because I can't wait to send Timothy to you guys. Because Timothy is going to tell you what's going on with me, but he's also going to bring news back to me and what's going on with you. That's true care, true concern. And he was willing to sacrifice his most faithful servant in order to bless others. I mean, he's not just talking about it. He's saying, I'm going to give one of my prized laborers to your service. You see, Timothy was there assisting the apostle. When you're in a jail cell in Rome, it wasn't like the jail cell in America. I think we got a tainted view of what a jail cell is like. You see, they don't give you 3 square meals a day. There's not a weight room or a TV. There's not luxuries and benefits. You see, you're put in a room, and if you were going to eat, it's because people from the outside were going to bring you food. Because someone's going to come and bring you a book to read or to give you something in order to occupy your time while you're under arrest. And Paul is saying, look, I'm going to send to you Timothy, my number one guy, because I want to know how you guys are doing. And I want you to know how I'm doing. You see, he was willing to sacrifice his own benefits in order to bless them. Notice what he says in verse 20. I have no one like-minded who will sincerely care for your state, for all seek their own, not the things which are of Christ. What a statement. There's no one that has the mind that I have except for this man, Timothy. Like-minded. He's going to care for you, genuine care for you. He's genuinely concerned about your well-being and your spiritual health and your spiritual, needs. He says, let me tell you what I discovered. Paul's in a Roman jail cell, and this is what he said, all seek their own, not the things which are of Christ Jesus. And what he discovered while he was in Rome is that there was a lot of self-centered Christianity taking place. They were seeking their own benefit, their own well-being, their own concern, but they weren't really concerned about Christ's well-being and the kingdom of God. And it's amazing that he would make such a bold statement. Everyone here seeking their own. May that not be true of us. Sad to say, I think it's true of the American church. I just came back from a third world country where it is just under persecution, and I saw a whole different mindset. I saw a whole different perspective. I saw a whole different priority that was in that church. And you realize that, you're going to live in one or two places. Either you're going to be self-seeking or you're going to be Christ-seeking. I like how Warren Wiersbe said it. He says, Christians are going to live in Philippians chapter 1, verse 21, or Philippians chapter 2, verse 21? I read that. What's he talking about? Look at chapter 1, verse 21. For to me to live is Christ and to die is gain. That's chapter 1, verse 21. Chapter 2, verse 21, for all seek their own, not the things which are of Christ. And as Christians, we're going to live in one of those two passages. You're in chapter 1 or you're in chapter 2. For me to live is Christ, to die is gain. To live as Christ means that this world's not about me. That this journey that I'm on is about my comfort or my ease or my benefits. My life is to be poured out, serving others, loving others, sacrificing. That's the Christian life. But Paul acknowledged there that not all seek, that's not true for everybody. All seek their own and not the things which are of Christ Jesus. And that was true back then, and it's true today. It's very rare to find the Christian who says, you know what, this isn't about my life. This is about the Lord. This is about his kingdom. This is about his glory. That my life doesn't belong to me. And he's talking about the sacrifice that young Timothy was willing to give to the church of Philippi, because I can't wait to send him to you, because I know that this guy is going to go out there and he's going to truly care about you. He's truly going to offer himself for you. Look at verse 22. I love this. But you know his proven character, that as a son with his father, he served with me in the gospel. There's something about Timothy, he's been proven. It's not just a motto. It wasn't just some words that he memorized. He was a man who was proven in character. You see, one of the things that Paul would write to Timothy is, says, you know what, don't lay hands on anyone too quickly. Let them be proven first. Let their character be evident. Don't go and anoint someone to a position unless you've seen their life and it's lived out for the right priority, the right purpose, because there are a lot of people who get into the ministry because they're looking to elevate their own position rather than to serve Christ and to further his kingdom. And he says, this is something I can tell you about Timothy, is that Timothy has a proven character, and Timothy isn't just there to serve himself, but he's there to serve the gospel of Jesus Christ. He's there to serve God, because I've seen it with my own eyes. He served with me in the gospel. He was there when I was beaten, when I was arrested. He partook with me when we were going through trials and tribulations. You see, he was someone who had experienced difficulty and trial and tribulation, and he didn't run. He didn't buckle. He's got proven character. And you see, God's wanting to prove us. He's trying to mature us. And he's going to allow us to go through some of those trials and tribulations in order to forge you, to strengthen you. And that you hold, that you don't waver, that you don't buckle. And as he's talking about young Timothy, he's someone who had actually walked that walk. And I think it's an important character that has to be forged in us. As you know, serving the Lord doesn't come easy, man. It comes with a lot of sacrifice. Because serving the Lord oftentimes is painful. People that you care about and love will stab you in the back. People you care and you love will gossip about you. You will experience things that the people that you made the most sacrifice for will be the people that'll hurt you the most. And yet, you realize I'm not doing it for man. I'm doing it for the Lord. I'm doing this for the kingdom of heaven. I'm doing it because I have an audience of one. I want to, when I stand in heaven, I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. I want to hear Jesus say those words. And it's amazing that as you look at Paul talking about young Timothy, saying, look, this guy is gold. He's been tested, and he's been proven to be genuine. And then look at verse 22 or verse 23. Therefore, I hope to send him at once. As soon as I see how it goes with me, I trust in the Lord that I myself shall also come shortly. And Paul is affirming, look, I know I got a trial. He's going to stand before trial very shortly. As soon as they find out what that verdict was, he wanted Timothy to go to Philippi and to make them aware of what was going on, and then he wanted to know how they were doing. But there's something he says here. He says, you know what, I believe God's going to free me here. I believe God's going to let me go back. Paul makes his way back to Philippi again. He's freed from this particular sentence, and then he's going to be arrested again, and the next time he's arrested, he's executed. But he knew, you know what, I don't think God's done with me yet. He wasn't confessing anything. He says, I just trust the Lord that this was going to happen. And it did. And so he, in this point, is acknowledging that, you know what, my prayer is to not only send Timothy to you, but man, I want to go and visit you and encourage you and be encouraged by you again as well. And that was his prayer. And then we come to verse 25. And verse 25 is an interesting passage all the way to the end of the chapter, the next few verses. Because what's happening is we're meeting a man by the name of Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus was from Philippi. Epaphroditus was sent with an offering to help Paul while he was in jail. The church of Philippi stood by Paul through all of his journeys. They would constantly help support him in his ministry as he was going and spreading the gospel. He was a missionary to different regions and starting different churches, as he had done in Philippi. And now he's in Rome, and they were aware that, Paul needed help. He needed some aid. And so they sent an offering, and Epaphroditus was the man that was delivering the offering, and they had sent him to aid Paul while he was in jail. If you notice here in the first verse, mentioning Epaphroditus in verse 25, he says, yet I consider it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, my fellow worker and fellow soldier, but your messenger and the one who ministered to my need. And here's what Paul says about Epaphroditus. Now, this is what you need to know about Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus wasn't a pastor. He wasn't a missionary. He wasn't someone that was noted anywhere else in Scripture except here in the book of Philippians. He was just a man who said, I want to be used by God. And Philippi sent him with this money bag to go and deliver it to Paul, and then to stay there with Paul and to help anything he needed while he was in jail. He was a layman. He was someone who was just available to the Lord. And when Paul notes him, he says, let me tell you what about this guy. He's my brother. He's my brother. We're family. We're tied together. There's loyalty to one another because we have something in common. And that commonality was Jesus Christ. He's my brother. He didn't just consider him a brother. He was a fellow worker, a co-laborer. Paul didn't say, he's my underling or he's someone less than me. He says, no, he's someone that's a fellow. He's a worker. He's there doing the work of ministry. Just because God had called him to do something different didn't mean it wasn't just as valuable. You see, every one of us have a place in the body of Christ. And what God has called you to do is of just as valuable as what God has called me to do. Are you faithful with what God has called you to do? It might be behind the scenes. I'll tell you what, it blows my mind. We have a group of people that come in during the week and they wipe down all of the children's toys and they do all of the cleaning that takes place here and, vacuuming. And no one comes and gives them accolades or tell them, what an amazing gift they have. They're just doing it behind the scenes for the Lord. Those are the Epaphroditus, co-laborers. They're the ones that aren't getting any recognition from men. But I'll tell you something, they're getting recognition from heaven. And God sees their labor and their labor of love. And there's not something less than in the kingdom. It's are you going to do what God's entrusted to you? Are you going to do faithfully what God's provided you to do? And I love Epaphroditus because he says, man, this guy is not only a fellow worker, and I love this, he's a fellow soldier. He's fighting this battle with me. Because we're in a spiritual war. We just took some time through the book of Ephesians chapter 6, and we're told that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of darkness. That we're to stand, and we have to do all to stand. And you're in a spiritual battle. And if you stand in that battle, then you're a soldier. And Epaphroditus was a soldier. You know, he had, we're going to find out he got sick to the point of death. And one of the things you notice here about Epaphroditus is that he didn't give up. He didn't stop doing what he was called to do, even though he had experienced this setback. And so Paul says, you know what? This guy's a fellow soldier. This guy is someone who is fought the battle alongside me when it comes to the kingdom. And here's this man. We would have never known him had this letter not been written. Never pastored a church. Never was on the mission field. We know nothing about him except that he had one task, and that was to deliver a gift from Philippi to Rome. And Paul acknowledged, you know what, this guy's a brother, he's a worker, and he's a soldier. And he's doing what God has called him to do. And because of it, man, I see him as a valuable asset to the kingdom. And if you're doing what God has called you to do, man, no matter what that is, man, right now we have a whole team in our children's ministry pouring into your kids. They're there faithfully, week after week, pouring into our 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds and I look at them and man, these guys are the soldiers. These are the workers. These are my brothers. Because they're doing what God has empowered them to do, to make a difference in the lives of others. That's ministry. It's that you're making sacrifices for the sake of others. And so that you and I get the opportunity to come and allow God to pour into us. Others are doing that ministry so that you can sit here and take in what God wants to say to you. That's ministry. That's what serving others looks like. So that we can be blessed, and we bless one another, and we serve one another. And Epaphroditus was that. And look what he says in verse 26 about him. Actually, I stopped let me go back to verse 25. He says, he's your messenger. The word messenger is apostolos. Apostolos is where we get the word apostle. It's someone sent forth with orders. And Paul says, he is your apostle. You sent him with the orders to do what he did, and he fulfilled his mission as he brought, the gift that you had brought for me, and he's doing what you asked him to do, and he was serving Paul. He tells us in the next part of verse 25, and who ministered to my need. That word minister there is the word leotorgos. It's where we get the word, the idea of being a servant or being someone who ministers to others. And he was ministering to Paul, bringing him, snacks. He was, bringing him meals. He was, trying to figure out what needs that Paul had while he was in there, delivering letters that Paul wanted to others. He was just there available. That's what ministry is all about, is being available to others. And Paul says he was ministering to me while he was here. And he commends him for those things. And then verse 26, since he was longing for you all and was distressed because you had heard that he was sick. Now, Epaphroditus was homesick. He had been away from Philippi. We don't know for how long, but he had been away from family and church family. He had been away from friends, and he was longing for them all. But it wasn't a longing because he wanted to go back to them. He was worried that they were worried because he was sick. He was, man, they don't know. Now, it's not like they could just pick up their cell phone and call and say, hey, how you doing? That's not the case, right? To find out how someone's doing, it'd take months. It would sometimes even years before they would get any word from the field. It wasn't like, you can just kind of send a message. And so he goes, man, he's concerned that you guys are concerned about his well-being. And he didn't want you guys being sleepless and anxious and worried about him. So he's been longing to let you guys know that he's okay. That's concern for others. Right, and he displayed that. Look at verse 27. For indeed, he was sick almost unto death, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. Now, many believe that that Epaphroditus had some kind of sickness, probably malaria. Malaria was very rampant in that culture. When we were in Sudan, I was diagnosed with malaria the third day we were there. And I caught it early. There was a couple of the guys that caught malaria on the second day we were there, and they didn't diagnose it right away. And I saw them, man. They were shivering. They were sweating, fever. They need help walking up the stairs. And then, 2 days later, I found out I have it, and I went, oh, Lord, this is not good. And but I was on some pre-stuff. I was on hydrochloroquine, and that's malaria treatment for pre. Malaria treatment, and so I had a very light case of it. But then they gave me the malaria, pills, and within 12 hours, man, all the symptoms were gone. Praise God! Thank you guys for your prayers again. But it was. I watched some of these guys with it, and I was like, oh man, this is serious stuff. They were sick, and I was concerned. One of them was, to the point of sick. I was concerned for his well-being, seriously. And to think that, and in that day, when you had a disease like that, when you had malaria, most of the time you would end in death. And what Paul is saying is look, God had mercy on him. He was healed. When you get that sick in that day, it wasn't normal for you to recover. And he was saying God had mercy on Epaphroditus, but not only on Epaphroditus, he had mercy on me, because I was already, all these other stresses going on, being in jail and what's happening in the churches and all these other things. He goes, on top of that, I would have had to grieve his death. He goes, that would have been too much. And God showed mercy to me because he healed him. That's concern, that's care. And Paul understood that. Man, it would have been too much for me if Epaphroditus would have died in this process. And he says God was gracious and God was merciful. And then he goes in verse 28 and he says, therefore I sent him the more eagerly, that when you see him again, you may rejoice, and I may be less sorrowful. Receive him therefore in the Lord with all gladness. Watch this. And hold such men in esteem. This is what Paul's encouraging. You see, there may have been some in Philippi that were going to say, why? What are you doing here, Epaphroditus? You're supposed to be there with Paul. Supposed to be there serving him. How come you cut your time short? He's saying, look, I'm sending him back to you guys. I'm sending him back to you, and I want you to receive him eagerly, and I want you guys to understand something, that you should be rejoicing that he's back with you, and not only that, you should esteem him for the service that he's done. And those who are serving the Lord should be esteemed. Those that are making sacrifices, they have great honor. They should have great honor. One of the pastors was telling the story as we were on this trip. Joe was telling the story of a missionary team, a husband and wife that had been off abroad for many years. They had a church that supported them, that had given them, financial help. They had They were on their prayer, being prayed for all the time. And they were finally, after many years, 20 years on the mission field, they are making their way back home, and they were thinking, man, as soon as we get home, it's going to be wonderful, because, man, all of our church family, all of our supporters, all those who have been praying for us are going to be waiting for us at the airport. And it's just going to be glorious to rejoice with them and to be part of it. And they land, they get off and come down, into the receiving area, and not one person was there. Not one person. And they had tears in their eyes, and like, man, where's our people? Where's the people that have been praying for us and supporting us? They kind of huddled together and they prayed, and the Lord spoke to their heart, and it says, you're not home yet. You're not home yet. And they thought, you know what? They're at the church waiting for us. They got to be at the church waiting for us. They get in their car all excited. They get to the church, and no one was at the church. They sat in the parking lot, and they shed a few more tears. And they heard that same voice, you're not home yet. They said, oh, we know what the Lord's saying. They're waiting for us at home. There's going to be a big party when we go to our house. They're all going to be there rejoicing with us. And they drive, rush to the house. They get to the house, and no one was there. They get off the car, and they're just really discouraged, really bummed out, and they hear that voice again. You're not home yet. And they realized that the not home yet wasn't talking about this world, but heaven. You see, when you serve the Lord, there's going to be a rejoicing that takes place when we get there. And I think Paul is reminding them, look, that don't just let it be there. Esteem them. Those that are living their life for the kingdom, those that are willing to sacrifice for the gospel. Esteem them highly, understand that they're working for your interests, for the interest of others, that they're living their lives sacrificially, and they should hold a place of honor. And he's encouraging them to honor young Epaphroditus as he had made his way back to Philippi, and not only to honor him, look what it says, and we'll wrap it up here, verse 30, because for the work of Christ, he came close to death. Here it is, not regarding his life, to supply what was lacking in your service toward me. You see, here is his evaluation of Epaphroditus. This guy was willing to put his life on the line in order to accomplish a service for you. And it's a very honorable thing when someone is saying, I'm willing to put my life on the line in order to further the kingdom of heaven and your interests. And those are people that should be esteemed. Those are people that should be acknowledged as, man, I appreciate the labor and the service and the work that you do. And he says, let me tell you something, man. These guys were doing it not regarding their own life. And guys, as we look at this whole chapter, think about the examples he's given. Paul says, look, Jesus poured out his life for you. Paul's talking about his life being an offering, a drink offering. Timothy, like-minded, not concerned about his own interests, but he's concerned about the interests of others. And then Epaphroditus, this man. And it wasn't just the spiritual giants. It was the laymen. All of them just saying, you know what? My life doesn't belong to me. My life belongs to Christ. And when we understand that, then we really find joy in our lives. Jesus said this, he who tries to save his life loses it. But he who loses his life for my sake finds it. When you're willing to lose your life for the sake of Christ, then you finally find the joy that you've been searching for your whole life. That's the gospel, and that's the message that we're to be living our lives, not for ourselves, but we're to be living our lives for others. And even more importantly, living our lives for God and for his kingdom.